17, and then before I was 17, I applied for the Navy, because you can join the Navy when you're in 1943. I joined the Navy and was drafted to HMAS Penguin on the 13th of April 1945. 43, I mean, 13th April 43. Oh well, it was quite very interesting, and but we had the first 3 weeks we had parade ground instruction, and we had a petty officer called Petty Officer Grimrod, and bloody hell was he grim, but he was so efficient that I nearly poked a bloke's eyes out behind me when we had fixed bayonets one day, and he scared the hell out of me. I didn't drop my bayonet after that. Being 17, you're classed as a boy in the Navy. Oh yes, before you go on weekend leave, if you're under 18, you had to tell the Navy where you're going to be. Otherwise, you couldn't go ashore. You had to name your host for the weekend. So I'd go to shore with two of my mates, go down Swanson Street. Two of them would peel off and go to the pub, and I go to my billets. that was hard, but I had a more comfortable weekend, I'm sure, than they did. Well, I always said on the rifle range, we had to go across to an island in Crib, what's the name of the harbour there? It's out of Crib Point, off Crib Point there's an island where we did gunnery. We learnt how to, shoot with a 303 rifle, a Vickers machine gun and a Lewis machine gun, and a Bren gun. The Bren gun had just come out then. So that was the highlight. We had a good, it was like a picnic. We had a good meal, good home meal cooked on, and so that was the highlight of was the rifle practice on this island off Crib Point. The radar station at Fremantle, when I got my call up to Sydney to do the radar mechanics course, and one of the seamen friends of mine, he was a leading seaman. He was going over to do a new course in radar control, and he was able to get a hold of a car to drive us around, and the bloke that usually drives the car came with us. And he said, and I remember my leading seaman mate saying, "Can you drive the bloody thing?" He said, "Yeah." So my mate drove around. We made sure he could drive it off, and he went around the bend from Lewin. We had to go to Lewin, and he seemed to be doing all right. And about an hour later, we saw the car being towed back by naval towers, with water dripping from it. He ran the bloody truck into the utility, into the Swan River. I don't know how, because the road goes practically alongside the Swan, near Fremantle. So that was a bit of a laugh.
Bit of excitement.
Well, we had straw pallhouses in the cattle trucks, and when we would stop at anywhere when it was scran time, we call it in the Navy. If you're going to have scran, it means you're going to have a meal. And when scran time was on, they're trying to stop by siding, and the cooks would get all their stuff out and cook on the side of the rail car, on the railway line. And we used to, we were given, things to eat from, and cutlery when we started off. The troop train that had the cattle trucks went from Parks just out of Kalgoorlie to Adelaide, or to no, we had to change trains then at Port Pirie Junction. They went from Parks because it was standard gauge, and when we got to Port Pirie Junction, it was broad gauge. So many railway workers died of heart trouble during the war because they were overworked. I mean, I know my World War One uncle, he was a yard master at Port Pirie Junction, and I know they had to work pretty hard. And so many railway men died during the war you don't hear of, and because they were overworked. There's no doubt about it. I went in summer and winter. In summer it was intolerable. It was so hot, and you got, you know, the straw used to be flying, and somebody dusted out their carriage, their truck driver, their truck carriage in front. You'd get it all in your truck if you were behind them. It'd come in. Oh, hell of a mess. So that was hard to put up with, but it was only 2 days. You needed a good bath when you got there. But the Yanks, I'll tell you one episode, they took it in turns. The Yanks took it one time to go, you know, get in the cattle trucks, and the Army, our Army, our Navy and our Air Force. Well, one time I was coming across, it was the second time I think, no, the third time. The third time it was the Yanks' turn to take the cattle trucks. We had the good carriage, and they didn't like it. They didn't have anything to eat from. They didn't have any utensils. The cooks used to give them empty cans at the stops so they could eat their food. But I felt sorry for the Yanks then. But anyhow, it was below the Yanks to have to ride in cattle trucks. So when the train started, they uncoupled it. Only half the train went off. The Yanks were left there in their cattle trucks. I think there were some other cattle trucks we were in too, but they had quite a few of them. So they backed the train back and coupled it up, and it happened again. They uncoupled and the train went off. So the third time the Yankee military police came along and made sure they didn't uncouple, and they hopped on the train as it was going slowly. That was the only way the train got going, with the MPs supervising and preventing the Yanks from uncoupling the train. On Hyde Park, the Comforts Fund had a free meal. We could get a free meal there. We call it the Millionaires Club. The Army had a special place you could have a meal for about a shilling, but this was entirely free. If you got there late, you're lucky to get anything. You only got bloody green feed if you got there late. Oh, you get the spud and some ham, and just a smorgasbord thing. Don't have to fill your tummy. It didn't cost anything, because we were terribly paid. You know, £3 one fortnight and £2.10 the next, and you got free board, of course. But see, the Yanks got more pay than that, so that's why they got more girls than what we did, because they could afford the girls. That's why they got more girls. When we were convalescing at this Inverloch place, naval rehabilitation and recovery place, the sisters used to grab a couple of us, we'd play golf with them on a Sunday morning instead of going to prayers. If you're in the upper deck, you're a seaman. But if you're in the lower deck, you're a stoker. But never occurred with me, but I know some guys used to look down on stokers because, and I know they wouldn't salute a stoker or an engineer officer. The officers are called engineers, not stoker officers. They're called engineers officers. And a lot of guys wouldn't salute an engineer officer. A lot of officers didn't know how to handle men. I found the British officers are far better officers than our men. You know what the nickname of our officers are? Has anybody told you? Pigs. We call them pigs. I don't know whether it's in any of the here. I haven't read in many history books, but you know they're known as pigs, which is terrible. I thought it was terrible. I still think it's so terrible. But because they didn't know how to handle men. I mean, they'd pick you up for the least little thing, whereas I was in the British Royal, attached to the Royal Navy only for about 2 months, and I found that all the officers were good. You didn't have to go and salute them at sea or any of that stuff, but you did that in our Navy, I can tell you. But on this, I mean, it wasn't pusses. As soon as went on this British cruiser, I had a report to the radar officer, and I gave him a smart salute. He said, "It's all right, Dietman, it's not pusser in this ship." So they made me, when we were in port, I became what we call the SDO officer, signal distributing officer. I used to have to take all the signals around to all the officers and any signals that came in. And you go up to the skipper on the quarter deck, and if you didn't salute the skipper on an our Navy, you'd be doing jankers. Whereas you go up to the skipper on this cruiser, you wouldn't have to salute him. You just stand to attention, of course, hand him the message, and turn around and go. So that's what I found out about. I found that the English officers were better trained, and they understood their men better. They could handle men better than our men. Well, I was a radar operator on the HMS Sussex, and then tragedy hit. My brother got killed in the Air Force, and he was only 19 3/4. He was a rear gunner in a Lancaster, and that was on the 22nd of February 1944, when I was still on the Sussex, and I asked the skipper, could I go home to my parents, for leave. I wanted to stay on the ship, but he says, unfortunately, Dietman, we got to draft you off because, they got, about an hour's notice to go to sea. So he had to draft me off the ship. Otherwise, I would have stayed on the ship. I liked the ship, but I thought my parents, he was my only brother, and my parents were pretty well upset. So was I, for that matter. I couldn't comprehend it. 19 3/4 killed, returning from a raid over Stuttgart, and he's returning from a air raid over Stuttgart, and they crashed. They were shot up so much they crashed. And he's buried in England. So I haven't been to England. I would have made England for D-Day had I stayed on the Sussex, but I couldn't. I had to be drafted off, and I thought my parents came first.